بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم افتح لنا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك وزدنا علما يا كريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is our seventh lesson on our commentary on Risalat al-Jamia. In this lesson we'll be considering the chapter on Sawm, or the section in this treatise on Sawm or fasting. A lot of commentaries on this little treatise, they try to explain why this author rahimahullah puts Sawm before zakah, right? Although whereas most books will put zakah before Sawm. So this book is a little strange in that it puts Sawm before zakah. So they try to give some reasons for it. Some of the reasons that they give is that Sawm was prescribed, or fasting was prescribed before zakah. Okay, and the fasting was prescribed in the second year of Hijrah. Another reason that they give is that when you look at acts of worship, you can divide them into bodily acts of worship and acts of worship that are related to the body and to a person's wealth, and acts of worship that are related to both. So salah, for example, is related only to a person's body. It's a physical action. Sawm, or fasting, likewise, is also a physical action. Zakah isn't a physical action, it's a financial action, or it's a monetary action, so it relates to a person's wealth. And Hajj, which we'll talk about in a couple of lessons, it relates to both. It's something that requires physical exertion, and it also relates to a person's wealth. It's also tied to a person's wealth because it requires a lot of money to be able to afford the Hajj. So one of the reasons that maybe the other author put Sawm before zakah is because Sawm is or fasting is also a physical action and not a financial action. So just to keep the order. That's one of the reasons that they give. Maybe the best reason that they give is that this is a beginner or a beginning primer in the Shafi'i madhab, or the Shafi'i school, and fasting is something that a lot of people need to know about, or more people need to know about it than zakah, because fasting applies to everybody, but zakah only applies to specific people, or not specific people, but people who are of a certain economic status. So maybe that's the reason why the author put it earlier. But it was likely intentional because all books of fiqh, or almost all books of fiqh, have the opposite order for fasting and zakah. So the author says, وَأَمَّا الصَّوْمُ وَهُوَ ثَالِثُ مِنْ أَرْكَانِ الْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ إِمْسَاكٌ مَعْرُوفٌ عَلَى وَجْهٍ مَخْصُوص. The author says that it's a third pillar of Islam, and we already know this from the hadith that we talked about at the beginning of our commentary, the hadith بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ, or Islam is built or established on 5 things. So this is the third thing. Fasting, as we said, it was prescribed in the second year of Hijrah, and the Prophet ﷺ fasted 9 Ramadans. He fasted 9 Ramadans, and all of them were 29 days, so they were all short months, except for one, which was 30 days. And some scholars say that the reason that he fasted so many 29 days is that people could know that 29 days is the same as 30 days. So if they fast a month, or if they fast a month of Ramadan and it's only 29 days, that they wouldn't feel that there's anything deficient in their month, which some people do. Some people, they fast for a month and it's 29 days and they feel that there's something deficient in the month, or had they fasted 30 days it would have been better. But 29 days is the same as 30 days with respect to the reward that one would get for completing the month, and with respect to forgiveness, and with respect to all of the fada'il, or all of the good things that are associated with Ramadan or fasting the month, like entering paradise through the gate of Ar-Rayyan, for example, which is a reward specifically for people who fast. It's the same for someone who fasted 29 days and someone who fasted 30 days. The proof text for fasting is the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. He says that believers, fasting has been prescribed for you as it has been prescribed for those before you, so that you can become righteous, or so that you would become righteous. And there's a lot of interesting things that people say, or that exegetes or mufassirun say about this verse. Sa'di in his tafsir says that when the Quran says كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم, like it was prescribed to those before you, he says that that's an indication from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He loves this specific action. Because if He didn't love this specific action, He wouldn't prescribe it to multiple communities, and He wouldn't tell people that I've done this to people before you as well. So it's an indication that He loves the action of fasting, because He prescribed it to multiple communities. Yeah, and it's therefore worthy of our care and attention and consideration. The author says, فهو إمساك معروف على وجه مخصوص. So, فهو إمساك معروف, that it's a specific type of imsak. Fasting linguistically just means imsak, and imsak means restricting or holding back from something. Okay, and if you use the word fasting itself, or sawm linguistically in Arabic, just means holding back generally. So, for example, in the Quran, Maryam says إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا, that I've taken an oath of a fast, صَوْمًا فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا, that I won't speak to any man today. So she uses the word fast, but she doesn't mean a fast from eating or drinking. She means a vow of silence. Okay, so fasting means a holding back from something. So that's why the author says that it's a specific type of imsak. It's from things that would break the fast break the fast in a specific manner. Okay. He says, وَمِنْهُ النِّيَّةُ لِكُلِّ يَوْمٍ وَتَبْيِيتُهَا مِنَ اللَّيْلِ. النِّيَّةُ لِكُلِّ يَوْمٍ. So the author here, rahimahullah, is starting to talk about the arkan, or the integrals of fasting, and the first one that he mentions is the niyyah. Okay, because fasting is an action of worship, so like all other actions of worship in the school, it requires a specific intention. Okay, there's a difference in the intention, depending on whether it's an obligatory fast or it's a non-obligatory fast. If it's a fard fast or if it's a nafil fast. So if it's a fard fast, for example, it would be like Ramadan, which is fard. Or it would be someone made an oath to fast, for example, so that fasting that, or making up that oath would be a specific fast. It would be a fard fast, or an expiation, kathara, or a person making up a fast that he missed that was obligatory. So all those would be obligatory fasts. Okay, or a nafil fast would be, for example, the 6 days of Shawwal, or fasting on the day of Arafah, or fasting on the 9th or 10th of Muharram, or fasting Monday and Thursday, and so on and so forth. Well, at the end of this lesson, we'll talk about some nawafil fast or non-obligatory fast. Okay, but the intention would differ depending on whether it's a fard or a nafil fast. If it's a fard fast, there's two things that are required for your intention. One, the author mentions it here in the text. He says, وَتَبْيِيتُهَا مِنَ اللَّيْلِ. So what's a tabyit min al-layl? Tabyitun niyya is to have the intention that you're going to fast this fard fast at some point between the sun setting and before Fajr comes in. So it's having the intention at any time during the night. Okay, and the night is from Maghrib to Fajr. So if you have the intention at any time during the night, that would be sufficient. And that's what they consider, that's what they call tabyitun niyya min al-layl. Okay, so it would be the intention for the following day. Okay, and when we talk about night and day, of course, the night comes before the day, so the night isn't after the day. So, in our calendar, in the the Gregorian calendar, the night follows the day. So Monday night means like the night right before the morning of Tuesday. But in the Islamic calendar, when we say Monday night, we mean the night that is before Monday. Okay, so the night comes before the day. So you're having the intention in the night for the coming day. Okay, so that's the first thing that's obligatory, tabit an-niyya. Okay, and that's because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man lam yujammi' as-siyama qabla al-fajr, fala siyama lahu." Man lam yujammi' as-siyama qabla al-fajr, fala siyama lahu. That a person who doesn't have an intention before fajr, there's no fast for him. Okay, and scholars in the madhab, scholars in the school, interpret this hadith um, as referring to obligatory fast and not nawafil fast because of other evidences that indicate that for a nawafil fast you don't have to have a niyyah or an intention during the night. So that's the first thing. The first thing is to have that intention during the night. The second is to specify what you're fasting. Okay, so you might remember when we talked about, for example, salah. We said that for a fard salah you have to have something called a ta'yin. You have to specify what kind of prayer it is. For sawm it's the same thing. For a fard sawm you have to specify what kind of sawm is it. Is it a Ramadan fast? Is it a qada fast, a makeup fast, or what exactly are you fasting? Okay, those are the two things that are required for a fard or an obligatory fast. For a non-obligatory fast or a nafil fast, your intention can be in the day or in the night. Okay, so you can have the intention before, between maghrib and fajr. You can also have your niyyah or your intention after fajr, and the proof for that is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, that the Prophet ﷺ came to her and asked, do you have anything that we can eat? And she said no. Okay, so he said, then I'm fasting. Okay, and the hadith is recorded in Muslim. And there are two, so it's permissible to have your intention in the morning. There are two conditions for this. The first one is that intention should be before the sun reaches its midpoint. Okay, so in the sky. So before what we would consider the time of dhuhr. So if your intention is before that, the time of dhuhr, or waqt al-zawal, or when the sun reaches its midpoint or the zenith in the sky, then it would be permissible to have to intend that I'm going to fast today. The second one is a bit obvious. You shouldn't have done anything in the morning that would negate the fast for the day. So you can't wake up at 7 o'clock, eat breakfast, and then later on in the day decide that I'm going to fast just because it's before dhuhr. Okay, so anything that would negate a normal fast, so whether it's eating or drinking or engaging in sexual intercourse, any of those things, if you do them in the morning, you couldn't after that decide that you're going to fast for the day because you've already broken the day. You've already broken the fast for the day. Okay, so those are the two conditions for having it, or for making the intention to fast a nafil or a non-obligatory fast during the day. Okay, and you don't have to specify what it is, like you would for an obligatory fast. So any kind of nafil fast, you can just fast it. You don't need a specific intention for it. Even if it's a nafil fast that is that the Prophet ﷺ recommended, like the 6 days of Shawwal, or fasting on the day of Arafah, or any of the days, Mondays and Thursdays, all of those days that have a specific proof for fasting on them. You don't need to specify what you're fasting for when you're fasting for it, because it's a nafil fast. Okay, so you don't need to know that okay, I'm going to fast today, and it's the fasting for it's one of the 6 days of Shawwal, for example. You can just fast it, and that would be sufficient. Okay, a couple things about the niyyah. Like we said, with everything, saying the niyyah out loud isn't a condition. Okay. So you'll hear a lot of people, I know people that you'll hear them, they'll stand up and they'll say that I'm making the intention to fast tomorrow for Ramadan, the fard fasting for Ramadan. It's not a condition. The niyyah is just something that's in your heart, and if you say it out loud, it's a sunnah, but you don't have to. The important thing is that you have it in your heart. Okay. And you don't have to. We said that the intention should be at some point in the night. So something that people sometimes ask is, what if you're asleep before Fajr and you sleep through Fajr? Is your fasting okay? Uh, it would be okay if you had the intention at some point during the night. So if you had the intention, for example, that you're going to fast tomorrow after Maghrib, and then you fell asleep, then you slept through Fajr and you missed Suhoor, and you woke up only later in the day, your fasting is still valid because you had the intention at some point during the night. But if you fasted from before Maghrib all throughout the night and you never had the intention during the night, then no, your fasting would not be valid because you didn't have an intention during the night. Okay, or you didn't think about it, then that would be a different thing. But you don't necessarily have to be awake just before Fajr. Your niyyah or your intention could be at any time. Okay, that's even if you miss eating something, or you miss even the Salatul Fajr, or you miss Fajr prayer, that would still be valid. Okay, the author says وَالْإِمْسَاكُ عَنِ الْمُفَطِّرَاتِ مِنَ الطَّعَامِ وَالشَّرَابِ. So the second pillar that the author mentions is al-imsaku anil mufattirat, that's staying away from anything that would break your fast. Okay, so the mufattirat are the things that would break the fast, and he lists them. So he says min al-ta'ami wa sharab, that's eating or drinking, wal-jima', that's sexual intercourse, wal-istimna'u bi-mubashara, that's masturbation, wal-istiqa'a bil-ikhtiyar, and that's a person vomiting. So let's talk about all of them. The first one he says is al-ta'amu wa sharab, so anything reaching a body cavity, even if it's small, like it's a sesame seed, not a sesame street, like a sesame seed, or it's something that you wouldn't normally eat, like a date pit, for example. It's not food, but if you ate it, it would break your fast because it goes into a body cavity. So anything that. But something that isn't a thing wouldn't break your fast. So. Like air, for example, or smoke, if you breathed it in and it went into your nostrils or whatever, and it would go into a body cavity, that wouldn't break your fast. Or even if you ate it, like you saw some smoke or something like that, and you decided, hey, I'm going to eat it, and you ate it, it wouldn't break your fast. Okay, it wouldn't break your fast because it's not considered a thing. All right, I said that something has to enter a body cavity. Okay, so a body cavity is something like the inside of your ears. Okay, not the inside of your ears or the area that you would wash in wudu, but beyond that. Okay, so if you pour water in your ears, for example, you can feel water go into into your ears, like the interior of your ears, which is different from the area that you can reach or wash normally. Okay, so like if you go swimming, for example, if you dunk your head into some water, you can feel water go into the interior. Okay, so when it goes there, that would break your fast. Okay, so you washing, like making wudu, for example, and you put water in your ears, water doesn't usually just go all the way inside. Okay, a person can feel the difference. Okay, so something that does go into the interior would break your fast. So for example, eardrops, for example, would break your fast because they're meant to go into the interior, and they actually do. Okay, so that's the inside of the ears, for example, is considered a body cavity, and so is like beyond the nostrils. So like your nose, that you would wash during wudu, like this area, all this area isn't considered like the interior, even though it's inside your nose. It's not considered a body cavity. What's considered a body cavity is beyond that, like up here at the top. If water were to go up there, again, you'd feel the difference. You'd know that water has like gone up into, I guess, the interior. So if water does go into that area, and not simply reach it, but go into that area, it would break your fast as well, because that's also considered a body cavity. Okay, so even if you're making wudu, I think we said that when we were doing wudu, that if you breathe in water, which is a sunnah to do during Ramadan, and you go to and you do it excessively and it goes in, it would break your fast. Okay, so it's not recommended while you're fasting to try to do that to excess. But most of the time, people, they don't do that. They just do it a little bit, and it cleans their nose. Okay. A body cavity would be so like we said, it would be like the head, and it would also be the what we consider the torso and the abdomen region. Okay, so your arms and your legs wouldn't be considered a body cavity. So if you were to stick something in your arm, it wouldn't be. That's not a body cavity. As opposed to like you sticking something in your chest or sticking something in your stomach, that is a body cavity. So something is going inside. Okay. One of the questions that people often ask is does an IV break a fast in the Shafi'i madhab? If you put it in the arm using this definition classically, it doesn't break your fast. Okay, but if you were to stick a needle, for example, in your stomach, and it doesn't even have to be an IV, it could be any needle or anything, it would break your fast using this definition. And that doesn't mean that a person should do that or they should use an IV. It's just interpreting a specific definition. So it doesn't mean that a person ought to hook themselves up to an IV during Ramadan. It's just using this definition that they give. Okay, and some scholars like a Shafi'i, for example, they hold that an IV does break your fast irrespective of where you put it. So even if you stick it in your arm, even though it's not they might because it provides nutrition, they consider it to break the fast. Okay. The last thing about the body cavity is that the thing that it reaches the body cavity, it has to be from an opening. It has to be from an actual opening, either like a natural opening like the ear or the nose or the mouth, or an opening that you've created, like for example if you poke something in, like a needle or something, that would be an opening. But it wouldn't be like something soaking into your skin. So if you put oil on your skin or you put cream or something, it would soak into your skin. So it would soak into your body, but that wouldn't be considered an opening. So the pores of your skin aren't considered an opening, so that wouldn't break your fast. Okay, or if you take a shower or you take a bath or something like that, water would soak into your skin, but that wouldn't break your fast. Okay, the author says wal jima', and that's intercourse. Intercourse would also break the fast. And we gave a specific definition for intercourse when we talked about ghusl, and here the definition is the same. So intercourse is the penetration of the head of the penis into another's private part. Okay, so anything more than that would also break the fast. Anything less than that wouldn't break the fast. Okay, so for example, even touching the private parts, it wouldn't break the fast. Okay, so intercourse would break the fast whether or not a person ejaculates. It would break the fast. Right? And the author doesn't talk about kathara or expiation, but if a person invalidates their fast, the fast of a complete day in Ramadan because of intercourse, they have to pay a kathara, and a kathara is an expiation. And this is the only thing for which there is an expiation. That's intercourse during Ramadan. To break a fast of a complete day in Ramadan because of intercourse. Okay, so a person who does that would have to do three things. One, they'd have to continue fasting for the day. So they wouldn't say, well, I already broke my fast, I'm going to go have a meal. They have to continue fasting for the day. The second thing is that they have to make up the day. And the third is that they have to pay a kathara, or an expiation. Okay. So we said that if a person invalidates the fast of a complete day in Ramadan because of intercourse, then they have to do these things. So if any of those things are not present, then they don't have to pay a kathara. So for example, if you're not fasting for a valid reason, even if it's Ramadan, like a sick person or a traveler, if they engage in intercourse, they don't have to pay a kathara because they haven't broken a day of fast. Okay, so they haven't broken a day of fast in Ramadan. because of intercourse, so they don't have to pay a kafara. Or if you break your fast outside of Ramadan due to intercourse, you don't have to pay a kafara because it's outside of Ramadan, even if you're making up a fast from Ramadan. Okay, so it has to be in Ramadan. Okay. And if you break your fast for another reason, like you ate something, there's no kafara. There's no kafara, even if it's in Ramadan. Okay, so what is the kafara or the expiation? The expiation is there's three things and it's in order. Okay, there's three things and it's in order, and that's important. The first thing is to free a Muslim female slave. The first thing is to free a female or a Muslim female slave, and one that doesn't have any disability that would prevent one from work, or that would hinder a person or prevent them from work. That's the first stage of the kafara or the expiation. If a person doesn't find that, or they can't find one, then he has to fast 2 months consecutively. He has to fast 2 months consecutively. And if he's not able to do that, then he has to feed 60 poor people. He has to feed 60 poor people, and feeding them is to give each one a mud of food that's permissible to give in zakatul fitr. Okay, so a mud is about 2/3 of a kilogram of rice. A mud is about 2/3 of a kilogram of rice. Okay, and a food that's permissible to give in zakatul fitr. We'll talk about zakatul fitr in our next lesson, but briefly, the kind of food that's permissible to give is a stored staple that's predominantly used in a specific community or a given context. Okay, which means that a staple is a food that makes up the major portion of a community's diet or a community's food. Okay, and in our context, in a North American context, and also in many other contexts, like in Saudi Arabia, for example, the predominant staple is rice. The predominant stored staple is rice. And there might be some other contexts, even today, in which the predominant stored staple is something else. But it seems that maybe even worldwide, the predominant stored staple that fulfills the conditions for something that you can give in zakat al-fitr is rice. Okay, so you would give a mud to each of the 64 people. Okay, and that's as I said, that's about 2/3 of a kilogram of rice. Okay, so that is the kafara, and I said that the kafara is due on the man and not the woman. Okay. Okay, so obviously the two people would engage in intercourse, the man and the woman, but the kafara is due on the man and not on the woman. Okay, and as I said, the order is important. So some people will immediately they'll think that they have to feed 60 poor people, but no, there's an actual order. First is to free the slave. The second is to fast the 2 months consecutively, and the third one, if you can't do any of those, is to feed 60 poor people. Okay, the author says, "Wal-istimna'u bi-mubashara." Okay, so masturbation, al-istimna is mubashara. Al-istimna is masturbation, and that would break a person's fast as if a person ejaculates. Okay, so intercourse without ejaculation would break a fast. So ejaculating with physical contact would break the fast a fortiori. Okay, and a person has to masturbation is a deliberate act, so a person obviously would have to have meant to do so. Okay, and this would break a person's fast irrespective of who does it. It could be the person himself, or it can be a person's spouse. For example, it could be with a cover, it could be without a cover. As long as the person ejaculates, that would break the person's fast. Okay, If a person ejaculates due to touching or kissing or foreplay, there's a bit of detail. If it occurs because of touching that would break your wudu, so like touching your spouse would break your wudu. So if that occurs because of touching that would have broke that would break your wudu, then your fast would be broken. If that is done with if your touching was done skin to skin. Okay, if it wasn't, it wouldn't break your fast. Okay, and if it occurs because of touching someone that you couldn't marry, or that someone that wouldn't break your wudu, like someone that you couldn't marry, then it wouldn't break your fast. All right, and the author rahimahullah says al-istimna'u bi-mubashara. So that's like that's physical touching. So if a person were to ejaculate, for example, because they were thinking about it, or they were looking at someone with desire, that wouldn't break their fast. Okay, because that's not considered masturbation. Okay, the author says وَالِاسْتِقَاءَةُ بِالِاخْتِيَارِ. And istiqa'a is trying to vomit. بِالِاخْتِيَارِ, he means that a person makes themselves vomit. Okay, so trying to vomit and actually vomiting, that would break your fast. Okay, and that's like masturbation. So masturbation is trying to ejaculate and actually ejaculating. Okay, so it's the same thing here. It's trying to vomit and actually vomiting would break your fast. So in the case of this, vomiting, it's something going out, right? It's not something coming in, but your fast would be broken irrespective of whether you're sure something went back down or didn't. Okay, your fast would still be broken. Okay, so this is trying to vomit. This is a person making themselves vomit, and that's in contradistinction to a person who's overcome by the sensation and they just vomit. Okay, so if they're overcome by that sensation and they vomit, that wouldn't break their fast. Okay, it wouldn't be broken by something coming out. Okay, because the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever is overcome by the urge to vomit, that the vomit would, whoever is overcome by the urge to vomit, it doesn't have to make up the fast. Okay, but whoever tries to vomit does. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ, "Man ضرعه القيء فلا قضاء عليه." That whoever is overcome by the sensation, that he doesn't have to make up the fast. Okay, but he said, وَمَنِ اسْتَقَاءَ فَعَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاء. So whoever tries to vomit has to make up the fast. Okay, so those are the things that the author mentions would break a person's fast. Okay, and they wouldn't break a person's fast if a person forgets that they're fasting. Okay, so any of these things that a person that would normally break a fast, if a person forgets that they're fasting, it wouldn't break it. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever forgets that they're fasting, and they eat or they drink, that they should continue their fasting, because the person who fed them or gave them to drink was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, that it was God who fed him, and it was God who provided for him something to drink. So that wouldn't that goes for everything that a person does if they forget that they're fasting and they do it, it wouldn't break their fast. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man nasiya wa huwa صائم فأكل أو شرب فليتم صومه فإنما أطعمه الله وسقاه." Okay, and that's hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. Okay, and a person would also have to know that these things break the fast. So if a person does these things and they're justifiably ignorant, then that also wouldn't break the fast. Okay, but the standard for being justifiably ignorant is pretty high. Okay, a person would have to be, for example, new to Islam, and they would have to be far from people from access to knowledge. Okay, so uh, when they envision this sort of justifiable or reasonable ignorance, they're thinking about people that became Muslim and they live far away from scholars and people of knowledge, and they didn't have any way of knowing. Um, so in that case, if someone does these things, then it wouldn't break their fast because they didn't know. So they wouldn't have to like make up the fast, for example. Um, but that that's a bit hard to envision in today's day and age because almost anybody can go on the internet and find it. At least in our North American context, pretty much anybody can know the basics of fasting if they wanted to. And there are scholars, and there are students of knowledge, and there are large Muslim communities. So um, it's hard to envision ignorance of the law being an excuse. Okay. There are some things that the author, rahimahullah, doesn't mention. One is that to fast is that a person can't be menstruating or in a period of postnatal bleeding. Okay, so they couldn't start the fast, and they wouldn't continue the fast either, if either of these things started while they were fasting. Okay, and a person has to have their faculty of sense for the entire day. Okay, they have to have the faculty of sense in that they can't lose their faculty of sense for a period during the day. Um, Sleeping during the whole day, it wouldn't break your fast. Okay, so um, if a person were somehow to sleep all the way from just before Fajr to after Maghrib, it wouldn't break their fast. Um, and neither does being unconscious. Okay, but if they wakes up for at least a moment during the day. Okay, if he wakes up for at least a moment during the day. There are some days that are actually impermissible to fast, and the author rahimahullah doesn't mention them. It's impermissible to fast on the 2 days of Eid. Okay, so Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha are both impermissible to fast. The second time that it's impermissible to fast is during the 3 days of Tashriq in Hajj. Okay, and the last day of Sha'ban, so Sha'ban is the month before Ramadan. The last day of Sha'ban, if there's some confusion over whether it's Ramadan or not, that's called Yawm al-Shak. That day is also impermissible to fast. Okay, and the last half of Sha'ban before Ramadan is also impermissible to fast. Okay, and there's an exception. There are some exceptions to that. One is that if a person regularly fasts. So if a person regularly fasts, for example, Mondays and Thursdays, the Mondays and Thursdays after in the second half of Sha'ban, they can still fast them. Or if a person was continuing their fast, so let's say they fasted the 15th of Sha'ban, they can continue fasting the 16th, 17th, 18th, and so on and so forth, up until Ramadan. But if they didn't, if they break that continuity, then they can't fast. So if they fast the 15th, they can fast the 16th. And if they fasted the 15th and 16th, they can fast the 17th. But if they break it and don't fast the 18th, then they can't fast the 19th. Okay? There's some sunnah aspects of fasting. One is to break the fast quickly after ensuring that the time of Maghrib has actually come in. That's a sunnah, to break the fast quickly and not to. It's not an act of piety to withhold or to keep fasting. And the converse or the flip side, to push back your suhoor is also a sunnah. To push it back until just before Fajr is also a sunnah, but not until there's some doubt over whether it's actually the time of Fajr or not. The sunnah is to push it back to a time that you're sure that it's not Fajr. Okay. It's also recommended to give charity while you're fasting, especially during Ramadan, and reciting the Quran, especially with other people. or reciting the Quran and letting someone listen, and another person reciting it to you and you listening, that's also a sunnah aspect of fasting and of Ramadan. And the Prophet ﷺ used to do it with Jibreel in Ramadan, um, to study the Quran together. Okay, it's permissible to break the fast for some people. It's permissible to break the fast for a sick person, someone who's physically unable um, to continue with fasting, or a traveler, and both would have to make up their fast. Both would have to make up fast, a person who's sick and a person who's a traveler. Okay, and the same goes for, as I mentioned, a woman who's menstruating or has postnatal bleeding. They'd also have to make up their fast. And someone who's unconscious would have to make up their fast as well. Okay, that's a person who, we mentioned a person who's sick. Um, that's different from a person who's old and they can't fast, like, period. A person who's sick, like a person who has an illness, for example, during Ramadan, but after it's expected that they'll get better, they have to make up the fast. But a person who's old, for example, and they're generally speaking unwell, they have some reason why they can't fast, and it's not expected that they'll be able to make up the fast anyways. They're not obligated to make it up. They're obligated to give what we call a fidya. Okay, and a fidya is giving to poor people. It's also a mud for each day. We said a mud is 2/3 of a kilogram. And they'd give 1 mud to each poor person. Okay, they'd give a mud to a poor person for each day of missed fasting. Okay, and they can actually give more than 1 mud to a person. They can give more than 1 mud to a specific person. Okay. The author says, وَمِن تَمَامِ الصَّوْمِ. Actually, about making up the fast. So if a person dies and they didn't make up the fast, and they didn't have a reason for missing it, like it wasn't one of the reasons that we mentioned. They just they didn't make up the fast, or sorry, they just broke their fast for a reason that isn't considered under the law. Someone could fast on that person's behalf, or they can feed for each day that was missed a mud of food. So a mud, we said again, was 2/3 of kilogram of rice. For each day of missed fasting, they can pay that from a person's estate. Okay, if a person had a good reason for breaking their fast, it was one that we consider legally, and he died after he couldn't make it up. Okay, let's say the person passes away after Eid, for example, he didn't have time to make it up, then there would be no fidya. You wouldn't pay this fidya on his behalf, and you wouldn't fast on his behalf either. Okay, but you would if he could have made it up, then you would do that. Okay, you could fast on his behalf, or you can pay the fidya. Okay, the author says, وَمِن تَمَامِ الصَّوْمِ كَفُّ الْجَوَارِحِ. So here we've been talking about the outer aspects of fasting. Okay, the outer sort of legal aspects of fasting, and now the author is going to talk about inner aspects and how to perfect this specific action, and this specific worship. Okay, so there's two things that we generally consider. The first thing is legal validity, and the second thing is excellence. So there's a difference between the two. So if a person fulfills the conditions of an action, and most of what we're talking about is legal, so if a person fulfills these conditions and they fulfill the pillars and they stay away from anything that would render the action legally invalid, then we would say the action is legally valid. Right? The action, when we look at it, we'd say, okay, this person has fulfilled the legal obligation. Okay, but that's different from for whether or not the action was good, and that's different from whether or not it's met with divine acceptance. So divine acceptance and legal validity are two they're two connected, but they're separate things. Okay, so here the author is talking about things that would, um, how to perform, how to perform your action of fasting with excellence. Okay, so he says, ومن تمام الصوم كف الجوارح عما يكرهه الله تعالى من الأعضاء السبعة الآتي ذكرها ففي الحديث خمس يفطرن الصائم الكذب والغيبة والنميمة واليمين الكاذبة والنظر بشهوة. So the author says that protecting your fast is to keep your limbs from anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes or is prohibited. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ said that fasting is a shield. So so if it's a day that you're fasting, he says don't raise your voice, don't speak badly, and if a person curses you or fights with you, say that I'm fasting or I'm a person who is fasting. Okay, and this hadith is narrated by Imam Muslim. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ also said that whoever doesn't leave off lying and false speech and acting upon it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no and acting ignorantly, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no need for him leaving off his food and drink. This is a hadith recorded by Imam al-Bukhari. So the author mentions seven. He says 7 limbs, and he says that we're going to mention them later, and he will talk about them at the end of this book. But the 7 here that he mentions, they're the tongue, the ears, the eyes, the hands, the feet, then the stomach, and the private parts. Those are the 7 that he talks about, and he'll go into greater detail at the end of the book. But generally speaking, a person has to protect all of their limbs from any act of disobedience, including things that people commonly overlook, like lying, backbiting, slander, speaking about other people. And we'll talk about this when we talk about the tongue at the end of the book. But just briefly, some of the things that he mentions. He says ghiba. So ghiba is saying something about someone else that another person wouldn't like. Okay, so it can be true, or it can be false. But saying something about someone that another person doesn't like is considered ghiba. Okay, and he says an-namima. Namima is so imagine someone tells you something and then you go relate the thing that a person said to another person. Okay, and the reason for doing that is to spread or to create problems. Okay, that's called an-namima. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "La yadkhulul jannata nammam." That a person who does this, who spreads the words of other people for this purpose, will not enter paradise. Okay, the author says, "Wal yaminul kadhiba," and he won't mention this later in the book. It's just al yaminul kadhiba is to swear about something that happened in the past, but it's not true. Okay, it's to swear about something that happened in the past and it's not true, or it's to swear that something didn't happen in the past but it did. Okay, and a person does that on purpose, and it's not by mistake, for example, and that's a major sin. It's a major sin, and it's also called al-yamin al-ghamus. Al-yamin al-ghamus. And they say that it's called al-yamin al-ghamus because it's almost like it envelopes someone, or it dunks somebody almost in sin. That sin completely engulfs that person, so it's called al-yamin al-ghamus. Okay. And the last thing that the author mentions is an-nadhru bi-shahwa. That's looking at something that is impermissible with desire. Okay, like looking at someone of the opposite gender, for example, with desire, it's haram. And he mentions it as one of the things that a person should leave off to perfect their sawm. Okay, the author says, وَمِن تَمَامِ الصَّوْمِ تَحَرِّ الْإِفْطَارِ على حلال وعدم الاستكثار من الأكل. Okay, So the author says that part of perfecting, or one of the things that a person can do to perfect their sawm, is to make sure that they're breaking their fast with something that's halal. Okay, that not with something that they're unsure about. Okay, and Nawawi al-Jawi, he says in his commentary that ala halal, or here when we say halal, it means that like we should that it just appears to be halal. That we don't have to know for 100% sure that it's halal, but just on the face of it, this thing seems halal, and that alone it would be that alone would fulfill this condition. That we don't have to know its actual source or how it came about, but it looks to be halal, so that's halal, but not something that we're unsure about. So if we have something and we're not sure about it, that's different from something that seems to be halal. So if you're not sure about it, then don't break your fast with it, is what he's saying. Okay. And that, of course, is completely different from something that you're sure is haram. If you're sure it's haram, then it's haram to eat it. Okay, and if you're not sure about it, then don't break your fast with it, he's saying. And if it seems to be halal, then that alone would be, that alone will fulfill the condition that the author here is talking about. Okay? And Nawawi al-Jawi in his commentary, he says that that in these days, that the only thing that you can be sure about that is halal is the rain that comes from the sky, or the rainwater that comes from the sky, that you hold up your hands to it and you fill up your palms with it and you drink it. That's the only thing that you could be sure of that is actually halal. And he says in these days, okay, and he's talking from the Imam Nawawi al-Jawi is the mid to late 19th century. Okay, so like 100, 150 years ago, that's what he's saying. Okay, the author says وَعَدَمُ الْإِسْتِكْثَارِ مِنَ الْأَكْلِ, that at the time of suhoor and the time of futur, that you don't eat a lot, or that you don't eat a lot, and that's because it runs contrary to the spirit of fasting. It's not haram to eat a lot of food, but here the author is talking about things that will help you perfect your fast. So part of it, or one of the things you could do, is not eat a lot, or because it's contrary, like I said, to the spirit of fasting. Okay, you're trying to purify your heart, and you're trying to purify your body. So eating a lot for suhoor or eating a lot for iftar would have the opposite effect. Okay, one of the goals is to rein in your desires. So if you're just doing it before Fajr and right after Maghrib, you're not really doing anything different. Okay, so that's why the author says وَعَدَمُ الْإِسْتِكْثَارِ مِنَ الْأَكْلِ. Okay, and generally speaking, a person shouldn't eat a lot of food. Right? The Prophet ﷺ warned against eating a lot of food, even when it's halal. Okay, so even if the food is halal, it doesn't mean that you should eat a lot. The Prophet ﷺ said that a person doesn't fill something more evil than his stomach. Okay, he said a human doesn't fill a container, so to speak, a container worse than his stomach, and that it's enough for him to eat that would allow him to keep his back straight. Okay, and that if he has to, that he should eat such that his stomach is full, a third of it with food, a third with water, and a third of it that allows him to breathe. Okay. No. So the author says وَعَدَمُ الْإِسْتِكْثَارِ مِنَ الْأَكْلِ, and part of that is that a person shouldn't try in Ramadan when they're fasting, or generally, to make up what they've missed during the day. So if you normally would eat like 3 meals, for example, you shouldn't try to set your biological clock such that you're eating all of your 3 meals during the night. Okay, because that runs contrary. It's not haram. But it runs contrary to the spirit of what you're doing or what you're trying to accomplish during the month. Okay, so the author says that you shouldn't وَعَدَمُ الْإِسْتِكْثَارِ مِنَ الْأَكْلِ, and then he says وَيَنْبَغِي الْإِسْتِكْثَارُ مِنَ الصَّوْمِ لَا سِيَّمَا الْأَيَّامُ الْفَاضِلَةُ فِي الشَّرْعِ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ وَبِاللَّهِ التَّوْفِيقِ, that a person should try to fast regularly. Okay, and we said that we'll mention some of the nawafil fasts or non-obligatory fasts that a person can do. But generally, fasting is a highly recommended act. The Prophet ﷺ said that in a hadith Qudsi, or speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that all of the actions of a son of Adam belong to him except for fasting, it's for me. Okay, it's for me, and I'll recompense for it, or I will give a reward appropriate for it. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ said a person has two, or a fasting person has two pleasures. One is when he breaks his fast, and the other is when he meets his Lord, because that's when he realizes the reward of his fast. So let's talk about some of the days that are recommended to fast. One of them is Mondays and Thursdays. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ used to fast Mondays and Thursdays, and he said that actions are presented on Mondays and Thursdays. So I want to be in a state of fasting when my actions are being presented. Okay, Mondays and Thursdays are recommended to fast. The second is is the day of Arafah. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about fasting on the day of Arafah, and he said that I hope from God that it will expiate the year before it and the year after it. Okay, or that I expect from God that that fasting on that day will expiate the year before it and the year after it. Okay, it's also recommended to fast the first 8 days of Dhul Hijjah. Okay, Dhul Hijjah is the last month of the Islamic or the Hijri calendar. So fasting the first 8 days are also recommended. Arafah is the 9th of Dhul Hijjah. Arafah is the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, and the 8 days before it are also recommended to fast. Okay, and it's recommended to fast these days because the Prophet ﷺ said that there are no days in the year in which good deeds are more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than these days. The first days of Dhul Hijjah. Okay, the 9th and the 10th of Muharram are also recommended to fast. Okay, so the 9th is Tasu'a, and the 10th is Ashura. Okay, those are also recommended to fast. The Prophet ﷺ fasted the 10th, and he was asked about fasting the 10th, and he said that it expiates a year before it. Okay, and he also said that if I live to the following year, that I'll fast the 9th as well. Okay, so fasting the 9th and the 10th, Tasu'a and Ashura are both highly recommended. Fasting 6 days of Shawwal is also recommended. It could be any 6 days of Shawwal, and it doesn't have to be consecutive, but they're highly recommended because the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever fasts Ramadan and then follows it up with 6 days from Shawwal, it will be as if he fasted for the entire year. Okay, and the last thing is Ayyamul Bid. Ayyamul Bid, which literally means white days, is also recommended to fast. And Ayyamul Bid are the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th of each month. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ recommended fasting these days to Abu Hurairah and Abu Dhar. Okay, and we mentioned in our previous lesson that the Prophet ﷺ recommended 3 things to Abu Hurairah, and this is one of the 3 things that he did, that he recommended to him. They were witr, if you remember. One of them was Salat al-Witr, and one of them was Salat al-Duha. And this is the 3rd thing, fasting on Ayyam al-Bid, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. Okay, so these are recommended days that that a person, or that are recommended to fast during the entire year, other than Ramadan, which is obligatory. So on that note, we'll close our lesson on the general topic of fasting, and in our next lesson we'll talk about the next pillar, which is zakah. وصلى اللهم وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.